Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into a really fascinating story from ancient Buddhist texts, one told by the Buddha himself.
Right. This is the Erakapatta Naga king story, a classic, really, told near Varanasi under a cerisa tree, as the texts mention.
Exactly. And it features, well, two main characters we need to keep in mind, Erakapatta, who is this powerful Naga or serpent king, and a young man named Uttara.
And the core message, the real heart of this narrative, it's captured in a verse the Buddha spoke right at the end.
Yeah, a very powerful verse. It points to how incredibly difficult it is to, well, achieve a human rebirth, first of all.
And then to sustain that mortal life.
Right, and even more difficult, perhaps, to hear the true Dhamma, the real teachings.
And finally, the absolute rarity, the almost unthinkably rare appearance of a Buddha in the world.
So this deep dive is really all about exploring why these things are framed as so precious, so incredibly hard to come by according to this specific text. We're looking at it through the lens of this Naga King's own pretty dramatic journey.
It's compelling, isn't it? How the story uses Erekapatta's personal history, his past actions, and their consequences to illustrate these really fundamental points.
Absolutely. So let's start there with his regrettable past life, as the outline puts it.
Okay. So Erakapatta wasn't always this giant serpent king. The horse material tells us that in a previous existence, way back during the time of the Kassapa Buddha,
Like a Buddha, yeah.
he was actually a young monk.
And quite a dedicated one, it seems. The text mentions 20,000 years of ascetic practice in the forest. That's an immense amount of time and dedication.
It really is. But the focus of the story, the hinge point, it comes down to a seemingly minor incident during that incredibly long period.
Okay.
He was on a boat crossing the Ganges River, and he broke off a small piece of water moss, an Araka leaf, which gives him his name later.
Just snapped off a bit of river plant. Seems trivial.
Exactly. And that's the critical detail. He didn't confess it as an offense according to the monastic rules. He sort of rationalized it, thinking, oh, this is insignificant, it's nothing, not worth mentioning.
Ah, okay. The lack of confession is key.
It's absolutely key here,
Yeah.
because the consequence, as described in the text, was profound.
Yeah.
Despite those 20,000 years of practice,
Yeah.
at the very moment of his death, the memory of that one unconfessed, minor offense just seized him. Like being grabbed by the throat is the image used.
Wow. Just surfaced right at the critical moment.
Right. He felt this intense regret over his impurity, his lack of complete honesty in the practice. But crucially, the text says there was no other monk nearby for him to confess to before he passed away.
So no chance to purify it right at the end.
Exactly. And because that impurity wasn't cleared through confession, because of that slip, however small it seemed at the time he fell from that state, his consciousness at death was clouded by it.
And that led to his rebirth
As a Naga king, described as being enormous, the size of a one-sided boat or maybe a dugout canoe. The text calls it a causeless birth state, which is interesting, perhaps implying it wasn't a direct result of a single positive action, but arose from that unresolved negativity.
And a state where, as you mentioned, frogs are eaten, kind of a detail that grounds it in a, well, less than ideal animal existence.
Definitely. And the text emphasizes his immediate, intense regret the moment he was reborn this way, realizing he'd practiced for millennia only to end up like this, crawling on his chest.
To such a stark contrast to his previous aspirations as a monk.
And the cost, spiritually speaking, was immense, according to this narrative. For one entire Buddha interval, that unimaginable span of time between one Buddha's dispensation ending and the next one arising.
Which can be incredibly long, right?
Eons. Exactly. Vast stretches of time. For that entire period, he didn't regain human status. He didn't get the chance to hear the true Dhamma again. He didn't see a Buddha.
All stemming from that one, seemingly small, unconfessed act. It really highlights the importance placed on purity and rectitude in the monastic context described here.
It really does. It locked him into a lower realm, delaying his progress for an age.
Okay, so he's stuck. He's in this Naga rebirth, carrying this deep regret, and he's acutely aware of the massive opportunity he's missed. What does he do?
Well, he doesn't just give up. The text says he formulates this rather desperate, long-term plan to figure out if, after this whole Buddha interval has passed, a new Buddha has finally appeared in the world.
How does a Naga king go about detecting a Buddha?
It's quite a dramatic setup. On Uposatha days, those special observance days every half month,
Okay.
he would go to the middle of the Ganges River, raise his massive hood high out of the water, and place his beautiful daughter on top of it.
Wow, okay, so she's perched up there. What does she do?
She dances and sings a very specific song. And this song is essentially a riddle designed so that only someone with profound Buddha-level wisdom could possibly understand and answer it correctly.
What was the riddle?
The first part went something like, what kind of person is truly a king? How is a king covered in dust? How is one actually dustless? And how is one called a fool? Deep questions, right?
Very deep. Not your average trivia contest. And was there a prize?
Oh, yes. Erakapatta made a huge offer. He promised his daughter in marriage, plus immense Naga wealth treasures from their underwater realm to anyone who could provide the correct answer.
So naturally, people tried.
People came from all over Jambudipa, the human world, drawn by the beautiful maiden, the fabulous wealth. They all offered answers based on their own worldly understanding of kings, dust, fools.
But none of them got it right.
Not one. She rejected every single answer. And the text really drives this home. A whole Buddha interval passed. Imagine, upasatha after upasatha, year after year, century after century. She sings, people guess, she says no.
That really emphasizes the point about the rarity of true wisdom, doesn't it? That for an entire age, nobody in the human world could penetrate the meaning of that riddle.
Exactly. It underscores just how profound and, well, absent the kind of understanding associated with the Buddha's teaching was during that long period.
Okay, so picture this scene. An age passes. No Buddha, no right answer. Erakapatta is still waiting, still running his cosmic quiz show by the river. Then the narrative shifts.
Right. It shifts to the time of our Buddha, Gautama Buddha. The text says the Buddha, surveying the world with his supernormal knowledge, sees Erakapatta still waiting by the river. And he also sees this young man, Uttara.
And the Buddha perceives the whole situation.
He sees the potential of this exact moment. He knows today is the day the Naga's daughter will sing again. He knows that Uttara is destined to receive the true answers from him, the Buddha.
And not just receive them?
No, he foresees that Uttara will instantly attain stream entry, the first stage of enlightenment, just by hearing and understanding these answers.
Wow.
And then Uttara will take those answers to the Naga king. Erakapatta will hear them, realize that Buddha has appeared, and come to the Buddha.
Leading to a larger teaching moment.
Exactly. The Buddha sees the whole chain reaction. A large assembly will gather because of this, and ultimately, through the teaching that follows, 84,000 beings will attain some form of Dhamma realization. It's an incredibly efficient act of compassion, seeing all these potential benefits ripple out.
So the Buddha acts on this foresight.
Yes. He travels to that area near Varanasi, near the sarisa trees mentioned earlier, and sits down under one of them, waiting.
Meanwhile, the usual crowd is gathering by the river for the contest.
Right. People from all over Jambudipa hoping today's their lucky day to win the princess and the treasure.
And then the Buddha spots Uttara.
He sees Uttara walking nearby and calls out to him. Uttara, recognizing it's the Buddha, approaches respectfully, pays homage. The Buddha asks him simply, "Where are you going?"
And Uttara.
Uttara explains, "I'm going to the place where Erakapatta, the Naga king's daughter, sings her song." And then he adds, quite confidently, "And I know the answer."
Ah, but he doesn't. Not the real answer, anyway.
Precisely. This is the crucial intervention. The Buddha gently tells him, "Young man, that answer you have is incorrect." But then he offers, "I will give you the true answer."
And what was the Buddha's answer to that first riddle? About the king, the dust, the fool?
The Buddha's authoritative answer was, "The true king is one who is the master of the six doors," meaning the six senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind.
Okay, so mastery over one's own senses, not external power.
Exactly. Then one who is attached to sense objects is covered in dust. Attachment is the impurity, the dust.
Makes sense.
One who is not attached is dustless. Freedom from attachment is purity.
And the fool.
One who is attached to sense objects is called a fool. Someone driven by craving and clinging to what they perceive.
That is a powerful redefinition, isn't it? Shifting the focus entirely inward. True kingship is self-mastery. True impurity is attachment. True foolishness is being ruled by attachment.
It completely reframes conventional wisdom. Now, the text says the Naga maiden wouldn't stop there. If someone got the first part right, she'd sing a second, follow-up verse, probing even deeper.
What was the second part?
It went something like, "By what is a fool swept away? How does a wise person push it away? How does one become yogakami, secure from bonds, truly safe? Tell me," when asked.
So getting into the dynamics of liberation.
Yes. And the Buddha provided the answer to this one, too. A fool is swept away by floods, oka, These aren't literal floods, but the four great spiritual floods. The flood of sensual desire, the flood of existence, craving for becoming, the flood of wrong views, and the flood of ignorance.
Okay, the overwhelming currents that carry beings through suffering.
Right. A wise person pushes away by yoga. Here, yoga means effort, exertion, specifically right effort, as part of the Noble Eightfold Path, actively resisting those floods through practice.
And how does one become truly secure, Yoga Kami?
One completely detached from all yogas, meaning all attachments, all clinging, all the underlying bonds, is called Yoga Kami. True security isn't found externally, but in complete inner freedom from those binding forces.
Freedom from the floods and freedom from the very things that bind you to them.
Precisely. Now, here's the incredible part for Uttara. The text states that just by receiving these answers directly from the Buddha, hearing them, and understanding their profound meaning,
He attained stream entry.
instantly, Sotapadhi, the first stage of irreversible awakening. Just from that transmission of Dhamma, it highlights the power of encountering the right teaching from the right source at the right time.
Absolutely incredible. So Uttara, now spiritually transformed, takes these verses and heads back to the river.
Yes, back to that massive gathering. The text gives this vivid detail. The crowd is so thick, so dense, that Uttara actually has to get down and crawl on his knees to push his way through to the front where the Naga maiden is.
He must have been determined.
You'd think so. So the scene unfolds. The Naga maiden sings her first verse, the riddle about the king in the dust.
And Uttara replies.
He replies with the Buddha's first answer.
Then she sings the second verse about the floods and security.
Yes. And Uttara replies with the Buddha's second answer.
And Erakapatta, the Naga king, listening from below.
He hears these words, and he instantly recognizes them. There's no doubt in his mind. He knows with absolute certainty these could only come from a Buddha. The depth, the meaning. It wasn't like anything he'd heard in that entire Buddha interval.
He realizes his wait is finally over. A Buddha has appeared.
Yes, and his reaction, fueled by this immense joy, this sudden release of hope after eons of waiting, is described as tremendously powerful, almost uncontrollable at first.
What did he do?
He struck the water with his mighty tail, creating these enormous waves, so huge, the text says, they broke the riverbanks and actually caused people who were standing or wading in the shallower parts of the water to drown. The water rose dramatically, maybe chest-high to a bull in places.
Whoa. So his joy inadvertently caused harm.
Initially, yes. A sort of raw, overwhelming expression of power driven by emotion. But immediately following that,
He fixed it.
he did. He used that same immense power, but this time constructively. He gathered the whole crowd, thousands of people, onto his enormous hood, lifted them all up out of the churning water, and gently set them down safely on dry land.
Okay, so a dramatic display, then a rescue. What next?
After saving everyone, Erakapatta eagerly turned to Uttara, urgently asking, "Where is he? Where's the master, the one who gave you these words?"
And Uttara points him towards the Buddha.
Exactly. Points him to where the Buddha is sitting peacefully under that sarisa tree.
So Erakapatta goes.
Immediately. Followed by this huge, grateful crowd he just rescued, he approaches the Buddha, enters the aura described around the Buddha, the six-colored rays, bows down respectfully, and then just stands there before the Buddha weeping, tears streaming down.
After all that time.
Yeah. The Buddha sees him crying and asks him gently, "Great king, why do you weep?"
And Erakapatta tells his story.
He recounts the whole thing. His past life as a monk, a disciple of Kassapa Buddha, the 20,000 years of practice, the seemingly tiny offense with the water moss, the Eraka leaf that he failed to confess.
Right.
His unfortunate rebirth as a Naga crawling on his chest in this lower realm, and the core of his sorrow. How for an entire vast Buddha interval he missed out. Missed the chance for a precious human birth, missed hearing the true Dhamma, missed seeing a Buddha like the one standing before him now.
It all comes pouring out. The regret, the long wait, the realization of what he lost.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to the central message the Buddha wanted to convey through this whole encounter.
After hearing Erakapatta's story, the Buddha confirms his point.
Yes. The Buddha validates Erakapatta's sorrow, stating plainly that what he missed out on is indeed incredibly difficult to attain. Obtaining human status. Truly difficult. Hearing the true Dhamma. Truly difficult. The appearance of Buddhas in the world. Extremely difficult.
These aren't commonplace things.
Not at all. They are obtained, the Buddha says, only with great hardship, great difficulty, and the convergence of many favorable conditions.
And it was at this point, after hearing the Naga king's story and affirming its implications, that the Buddha spoke that specific verse. the one found in the Dhammapada.
That's right, the verse that really encapsulates this whole teaching. Difficult is the attainment of human status. Difficult is the life of mortals. Difficult is the hearing of the true Dhamma. Difficult is the appearance of Buddhas.
Kicha municipalabov, kicha makana jivita, kicha satabana savana, kicha burana mupado. That's the Pali, roughly.
Exactly. And the commentary, the source material, goes on to explain why each of these is considered so difficult. It gives a kind of breakdown.
Okay, let's hear that. Why is human status difficult?
It's difficult to get because it requires immense past effort and the accumulation of significant merit over many, many lifetimes. It's not a default state. It's earned through virtuous conduct.
Right. And the life of mortals, why is that difficult? It seems obvious, but what's the specific angle here?
It's difficult to maintain. Not just the daily struggle for livelihood, food, shelter, but the inherent precariousness of it. Life is short, subject to constant change, illness, aging, and ultimately death. It's fragile.
Okay. And hearing the true Dhamma.
Difficult because a person who can teach it clearly, accurately, effectively, who truly understands it themselves, is incredibly rare across the sweep of time. Such teachings aren't always available. Buddhas don't appear in every age. And even between Buddhas, authentic teachers might be scarce.
So the opportunity itself is rare.
Very rare. And finally, the appearance of Buddhas themselves.
Why is that described as extremely difficult?
Because the path to Buddhahood, fulfilling all the necessary perfections or paramis, requires cultivating qualities like generosity, virtue, wisdom, energy, patience, and so on, to their absolute peak over countless millions of eons. It's an unimaginably vast undertaking.
An immense journey of spiritual development.
Immense. So the beings who successfully complete this journey and become Buddhas are profoundly rare across cosmic timescales. Their appearance is an extraordinary event.
So putting it all together, the verse is saying, getting the right vehicle, human birth, keeping it running, mortal life, finding the right map, true Dhamma, and encountering the guide, a Buddha, each step is incredibly precious and hard-won.
That's a good way to put it. Each stage represents a significant hurdle overcome, a rare confluence of positive factors.
So what was the result of the Buddha giving this teaching, this verse and its explanation to Erakapatta and that huge crowd by the river?
The immediate impact on the assembly was profound. The text states that at the end of the discourse, Dhamma realization occurred for 84,000 beings in that crowd.
Wow, 84,000 people gained some level of insight or awakening. That fulfills the potential the Buddha saw earlier.
It does. But then there's this very specific, poignant detail about Erakapatta himself.
Ah, yes. What happened to him? Did he also attain stream entry? He heard the verses, he heard the discourse, he recognized the Buddha?
He would have. The potential was there. He had the understanding, the faith, the direct encounter. But the text explicitly states he did not obtain the fruit of stream entry that day.
Why not?
Because he was in an animal rebirth. His state of being as a Naga, even though he was powerful and intelligent, was ultimately a barrier to that specific kind of path attainment at that moment.
So his past karma, resulting in that rebirth, prevented him from reaping the full benefit, even when face-to-face with the Buddha and the Dhamma. That's harsh.
It's a stark illustration of the point about the difficulty and preciousness of human birth for full spiritual progress, according to this tradition. However, he didn't leave empty-handed.
He did get some benefit.
Yes, a significant reprieve. As a direct result of hearing the Dhamma and his encounter with the Buddha, the text says he was no longer troubled in the 5 specific ways Nagas normally suffer.
Which are?
Things related to their specific existence. The nature of the rebirth itself, the apparently painful process of shedding their skin, how they fall asleep, perhaps losing consciousness in their true form, issues around Naga sexual relations, and the process of death for a Naga. He was freed from those particular sufferings.
That's still a major improvement in his condition.
Absolutely. And perhaps most notably, he gained the ability to appear and move about in the form of a young human man whenever he wished, shedding that massive serpent form. He could interact more easily, perhaps.
So looking at Erakapatta's whole arc, immense effort as a monk, a small slip left uncorrected, a terrible consequence in rebirth, an incredibly long wait, finally encountering the Buddha, hearing the Dhamma that benefits thousands.
But missing out personally on stream entry because of the very rebirth state that resulted from his past lapse.
It's such a powerful, maybe even cautionary tale about the interconnectedness of action, consequence, rebirth, and opportunity.
It really drives home the message about how rare and valuable the conditions for full spiritual practice are considered to be.
Okay, let's try to wrap up this deep dive then. We've journeyed through Erakapatta's story, seeing how it illustrates that central message from the Dhammapada verse.
Yeah, the sheer difficulty. Attaining human status, sustaining mortal life, hearing the true Dhamma, and the almost inconceivable rarity of a Buddha's appearance.
These things, the text argues, are precious, hard-won opportunities not to be taken lightly.
Erakapatta's story serves as a vivid, extended example of just how difficult they are, and how even a small mistake, unaddressed, can lead to missing them for vast periods.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over, drawing from this story. Considering the extreme rarity emphasized here, the preciousness of human birth, the chance to encounter teachings of liberation, the window provided by a life where such understanding is even possible.
And seeing how Erakapatta, despite his immense past efforts and eventual encounter, was still limited by his state of being.
What implications does that have for how we might view our own circumstances right now? If being human offers such a unique, rare platform for understanding and practice, as the story suggests, well, what does that perspective suggest about how we might choose to engage with our lives and with the pursuit of wisdom or understanding?
It certainly gives you something to think about, doesn't it? The value of the present moment and the potential held within this particular form of existence.